All right, everybody, welcome. Hopefully you can hear us all right. Does that sound okay for sound so far? Fantastic. We're so glad to be here with you today. I'm Glenn Cohen. I'm a professor here at the law school, and also I'm the faculty director of the Petrie-Flom Center, who is what's bringing us together today. We're delighted to welcome you to our 2024 open house and launch for the center for the year. This is going to be a pretty fast and exuberant introduction before I turn things over to our esteemed panel of all-stars, and they really are all-stars. I'm a little starstruck. The Petrie-Flom Center is going to be 20 years old next year, and I've been with it for about 18 of those 20 years, more or less. So that's pretty exciting, and it's exciting for us that we can still engage in brand new topics, brand new people, and a brand new audience. And it's really the people that are here in this room that we engage with that keeps our center feeling young and vital. We run fellowships, we run events, we run research, we do conferences and other programming that are all designed to promote a really interdisciplinary and open-minded analysis about legal scholarship in the entire range of health law policy, bioethics, biotechnology. Over the last 20 years, if it's interesting and important, chances are we've had an event on it, but we love having new ideas for events being suggested to us as well. If you haven't yet browsed our website, I encourage you to do so, including adding yourself to our listserv as a subscriber that will come out every 2 weeks. We promise it's not too bothersome, but it'll keep you well aware of what we're doing and what's coming up. We'll have some time to chat after this event more in person as we move down to the HLS pub, which is located on the first floor of this building. You'll see us move en masse. There'll be a reception. There will be alcohol for those of you who are of age. I know there's a few people who might have snuck into this event, but you won't get a drink ticket, but the rest of us will. But we'll have lots of good non-alcoholic drinks as well, if those things actually exist. And for the moment, I just want to point out to the people who are in the room who you should kind of meet and make sure to get a chance and really to thank. One is our executive director, Susanna Baruch. Susanna, do you want to wave to people? Yay, Susanna! Laura Chong is our administrative and financial director. She might be outside in the hall, but you can hear us clap for her. And then also outside, still checking people in, is Lisa Gorlick, who's our program assistant. So a big round of applause for her. And we'll introduce a bunch of other people who are senior fellows, people who are student fellows, people who are members of other parts of the university. We really think of this as an introduction to these topics across the university today. But now I get the pleasure to introduce our esteemed panel, starting with our esteemed affiliated researcher, Leonard Picard, sitting next to me. He's the one who first conceived of this panel, and he recently interviewed George Church, sitting next to him, and Alex Zavrankov, next to him, for our Bill of Health, or two over from him, excuse me, Alex on the end, for our Bill of Health blog. Leonard is a former research associate in neurobiology at Harvard Medical School, a Harvard Fellow in Drug Policy at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, and a Deputy Director of the Drug Policy Analysis Program at UCLA. Next, I want to introduce my amazing colleague, Ruth Okediji. She is the Jeremiah Smith Jr. Professor of Law at Harvard Law School and co-director of the Berkman Klein Center. She is a renowned scholar in international intellectual property law and its role in social and economic development. She has advised intergovernmental organizations, regional economic communities, and also national governments on a range of matters related to technology, innovation policy, and development. And she's one of my favorite people at Harvard Law School. Then I want to introduce Tina Liu, who's recently joined the corporate strategy team at Thermo Fisher Scientific. She's the former CEO and co-founder of Skylark Bio and Ally Therapeutics, a member of our center's advisory board. Tina is an early-stage biotech entrepreneur, healthcare investor, and was a gold winner of the Women World Awards for Female Executive of the Year, and we're so grateful to have you here. Dr. George Church, professor of genetics at Harvard Medical School and professor of health sciences and technology at Harvard and MIT. He leads synthetic biology at the Weiss Institute and is a prominent geneticist, molecular engineer, chemist, serial entrepreneur, and pioneer in personal genomics and synthetic biology. He is probably our generation's answer to Darwin, if I have to say it to myself, in terms of his stature among his colleagues. Finally, I want to, last but not least, Dr. Alex Z, as he told me to call him. Dr. Alex Z is the founder and CEO of In Silico Medicine and a leader in generative artificial intelligence technologies for drug discovery and biomarker development. He was recognized by Deep Knowledge Analytics in 2019 as one of the top 100 AI leaders in drug discovery and advanced healthcare globally. Please join me in a big round of applause for this amazing panel. Now, Leonard, I think you have the first two questions. I'm going to turn it over to you for that, if that's okay.
Oh my goodness. CARP, C-A-R-P, and pull-ups. What do these two things have in common? No answers? CARP is what is the back screen of George's Zooms. When we first spoke last December, it was like God coming down from the mountains. Here's George holding the tablets of genomics. And behind him were swirling koi. Well, is that a film that you got back there, George? No, my security camera fell into our carp pond and I decided to keep it. So our interaction was entirely based on that lovely circumstance. Pull-ups. What do pull-ups have to do with all this? That's Alex Z. Goodness, Alex found a Nobel laureate in his 70s who was unusually trim and firm and became a great admirer of this individual, Michael Levitt, a computational chemist, and asked him his secret for those arms. Notice Alex's arms, and the muscle shirt. Michael said he had a collapsible pull-up bar that he took from hotel to hotel around the world. So Alex has been emulating this for some years and just posted his growth exhibits, 2018, 2022, 2025, of his arms on LinkedIn, where he has 50,000 followers. Posts relentlessly. And just proposed at the Aging Conference in Copenhagen to the lovely neuroscientist Dominica. Got down on his knees before 1,000 top researchers, flexed his arm, of course, and offered her the ring. Happily, she accepted. But the question I have for each, and this is posed initially to George and then to Alex, and both can answer independently, is that they're somewhat at odds in terms of the possible application of genomic and small molecule technology to improvement of human performance. We're at a hockey stick moment in terms of science, where we can now affect the future of our species, change evolution. We can enhance certain mental abilities, if you will, attention, learning and memory, possibly the 100 or so genes that contribute a small amount to educational attainment, intelligence, Spearman's G factor, a battery of cognitive tests for human capability. So the question really is that Alex Z and George are somewhat antithetical. George feels that, if I'm incorrect, that enhancement is possible. On the net, he has a list of 100 genes for enhancement of muscularity, other traits. Alex, on the other hand, whom I recently interviewed, feels that we are behind in development of the neurology, the neuroscience. But even with, say, quantum computer advancement of AI, and all of his drug designs or AI-designed molecules through generative adversarial networks, even with these marvelous technologies, it will be a long time before we see an oral pill for enhancement of attention, cognitive performance. So let me ask both in turn. George, can you speak to the arc of genomic improvement of the human ability?
So maybe we're aligned if we put a lot of emphasis on the oral part, because almost all the therapeutics I work on are delivered intravenously or intrathecally. So, but on the other hand, I think that could change as well. I think we will have ways of delivering gene therapy orally. But the reason that I can say one thing that probably won't get cognitive. A lot of the worries about cognitive enhancement have been focused on babies on doing it through the germline. I think that's not the way we're going to do it. Not necessarily because we're super ethical, which we are, but because 8 billion of us have already missed that milestone, and so we're not really candidates for enhancement. And so I think there's going to be a lot of pressure to work at a later age. I think the second reason is that in the process of trying to solve cognitive decline, which is going to be an increasing problem worldwide because of our demographics now, so many countries have either had a one-child rule or some other thing that has caused us to have maybe an older population. That there is a lot of emphasis on, and we're already starting to see drugs that are aimed at Alzheimer's and other neurodegenerative diseases. Just yesterday I was on a SAB meeting with Transposon Therapeutics, and they have an inhibitor of a polymerase of a transposable element that goes around wreaking havoc with your brain, and it looks promising for ALS, PSP, and Alzheimer's. So anyway, there'll be a lot of those sort of things. Some of them will be small molecules, some of them will be gene therapies. I think to some extent they're fungible or interchangeable. The main difference is that small molecules, you have to work really hard to distinguish targets that have different function but very, very similar active sites. While with large molecule proteins, gene therapy and so forth, you can just say, this is the isoform. I'm sorry, I'm using jargon, but this is the precise version of the protein we want to be dealing with. So there's a growth industry as well in aging, and so this is kind of cognitive enhancement indirectly by allowing us to learn for a longer period of time and then not immediately become obsolescent. I mean, what a pity to build and program a supercomputer and then say, okay, now it's built and programmed, we're going to unplug it and turn it into, scrap iron. It's essentially what we do, what we've been doing for a million years. But there will also be things that are specifically, we're getting much better at it, we're getting better at developmental biology. Developmental biology is hitting the same artificial intelligence, machine learning milestones that Alex and I have seen really hit for proteins and small molecules. Is now going into developmental biology, which is a slightly harder problem. But I think a lot of AI is hype, but I think when it comes to proteins and small molecules, for sure, it is observably not.
So 100% agree. Biologics and gene therapy has huge potential. There are several problems with biologics and gene therapy. One is it's very expensive, and it's very difficult to validate gene therapy at this point in time. Biologics are mainstream, they're just expensive, difficult to transport, difficult to make, and difficult to store. So the beauty of small molecules is that once you have a small molecule for a protein that you know really, really well, once the molecule goes off patent, it becomes extremely cheap to make, easy to store, and you can administer it anywhere in the world for peanuts, right? So it's a very, very cheap way to distribute medicine around the world. And what we do at Insilico, we focus currently on small molecules, provide software to the industry for biologics, and we've managed to get 9 drugs into human clinical trials already, so a couple of them are in phase 2. One just completed phase 2. And to address kind of the first question in terms of human performance enhancement, I think that now our understanding of human biology is so minute, is so weak that we actually first need to solve the problem of losing. So every one of you has inflation of life. Aging is the inflation of life. After you reach your peak, you start degrading and ultimately dying. So nature is not very fair. If you get a disease, it happens faster. And right now, most diseases we are looking at, they are not really curable. And of course, for aging, we still don't have a really good understanding of where to intervene in order to slow that or restore the lost function. But the beauty of modern AI is that you can find some protein targets that are implicated in aging and disease at the same time. And like, for example, all of us experience sarcopenia, so muscle loss during aging. To address this problem, and also if you go on to GLP-1 inhibitors, those funny, well, really cool drugs that everybody is taking nowadays, injecting. There was a South Park episode about those drugs. Trying to get slimmer. Those drugs, once you get on them, up to 40% of the weight loss is actually muscle loss. So you lose muscle. And in order to prevent loss of muscle, now a lot of companies are going after muscle boosting drugs that might be safe. So imagine a drug that is addressing a real significant problem, but at the same time providing you with additional benefit. So I like to call those therapeutics dual-purpose therapeutics. So pretty much every therapeutic that I have in my pipeline, well, not every, but let's say 80%, has the dual-purpose potential where we're trying to address an immediate need, either fibrosis or metabolic disease or immunology disease or cancer. But at the same time, those targets, we have implicated them into different aging processes. And they might be able to also address some of the problems in aging. Hopefully, maybe even improve some functions, just as a bonus. So, but first we need to address diseases because you need to ensure that it's commercially viable. And until you get into drug discovery yourself, you don't really understand how complicated and lengthy this process is, how committed you need to be to the therapeutic program before you go after the next shiny thing, and how difficult it is to get an approval, and also how much it costs, because every time we kind of spin the dial in this huge molecular casino, every time you need to double your bet or triple your bet every time you go to the next stage of clinical trials. And if you fail, you lose everything. Right? And if you are just in the wrong place, you cannot fundraise, or you need additional data. So there are so many things that can go wrong. In order for you to be successful, you need to focus on the disease in the current framework. Because if you just imagine that it's very difficult to develop a drug for a disease, if you try to go after a specific cognitive enhancement, for example, project, you are never going to get a drug approved. So far, I have not seen a single successful aging research company that got a drug approved, right? Maybe, George, you can disagree. So far, there is nothing, no therapeutics. There's lots of biomarkers. And when I'm saying that I'm skeptical about this field a little bit, it's just the timelines are very long, very lengthy. The failure rates are very significant. And the costs currently on average, $2.8 to $6.1 billion to get a drug on the market. And most of the pharma companies are super inefficient. So thinking about enhancement, it's good, but let's think about first solving diseases, and maybe with small molecules, and then transition to more advanced types of therapy. Of course, George is at the very frontier. And we just are the kind of scavengers of knowledge. We're taking this knowledge and trying to get the drugs in human clinical trials.
Thank you, Alex, but this is the law school, so we have a cross-examination by George.
I want to get on to the other panelists, but just quickly, when you say that gene therapies are expensive, you're referring to rare genetic diseases. Probably many of you have taken something formulated as a gene therapy already. 5.6 billion people in the world have taken this category of gene therapy, which is the COVID vaccines. Those were either in viral form or in lipid encased messenger RNA. And those were close to $30, maybe $100 in the long term. So they can be quite inexpensive, and they didn't require the patent to elapse either. So I think we should get used to it. And I totally agree with the point about that you need to go for diseases rather than enhancement, but you can go with diseases with an enlightened view of enhancement.
Yeah,
So
dual purpose, yeah.
and all the things in my clinical trials are very, very similar, I think, in that we are taking things that we thought would be good anti-aging drugs, but rather than taking the FDA to court and saying, aging is a disease, you will obey, we just say, okay, we like the diseases on your hit list, we're gonna take one of them, and if we're right, it's gonna solve multiple ones, but you just have to get approval.
Agreed,
one of them.
agreed 100% with that. Dual purpose therapeutics.
I'm a terrible cross-examiner.
Did you approach the bench here? George, just spend another week here, you'll be much, much better at it. Well, I want to come back to you a little bit later in the panel, the two of you, and ask a little bit about how law and ethics constrains the decisions you make and where it enters into the picture. But first, I want to bring the other panelists in. Tina, you were for many years leading a small biotech startups, looking at the immune response issues that limit safety and efficacy in vivo gene therapies. Now you're at a very big company. I think it's like the 48th biggest company in the world. That's really big at Thermo Fisher. And I guess if you could talk a little about first what inspired you to make this change, how you, what differences you've noticed it, but more importantly, how you see the legal and regulatory issues being very different at a large multinational organization in this space versus a small startup.
Yeah, happy to chat about that. So a little bit of background, I think I touched healthcare and biotech from several different angles at this perspective, and that's probably a major driving force for why I made such a big shift as well. I started out my career actually in healthcare finance, first investment banking and private equity investing, covering healthcare and all the different types of businesses in healthcare, including biotech, biopharma. And then I shifted to start Blend, and the first company that I helped co-found was actually with George. That was Allies. We spun out from his lab and was developing gene therapy technologies that would produce immune responses to those gene therapies, make them safer, efficacious, more broadly applicable to all the points that have been mentioned so far. Like many startups, unfortunately, it was a victim of a negative preclinical result that told us we were not able to continue in translating that into immediately ready human clinical product. But it did lead us to start amassing a bunch of resources, team knowledge that led to the second company, which was developing gene therapies for hearing loss. So we went through, kind of the startup journey of trying to figure out where the science will actually work and then pursuing where the science actually works. And fortunately, that company is doing really well. The technology was working in monkeys, and I led that through a Series A as the CEO before I, for personal reasons, decided to transition to a longer-term CEO. And there were lots of reasons for that, one of which was that at some point you realize someone else is a really great fit for the long-term mission of this company that I just felt was not myself at that time. The other was that I became a mother and just felt that I needed to take some time to really transition to that phase of life. That then led me to really think much more open-minded about where the world was going. Right, I had a personal stake now, not just selfishly, but for my children and future children, in where the world was going. And so I spent actually a year exploring climate change and understanding the science there and technologies there. And so the reason I went to the big company perspective coming out of that was I became really curious. First, that exploration period made me really aware. Startups are one tool, right, for advancing science. It's not the only tool, and it's part of an ecosystem. I had been a little bit more close to the academic side and the very early stage startup side, think about a company less than 10 full-time employees. But I wanted to see what was the other perspective, how big companies think about this. And I have always been wondering, how can a tiny startup possibly compete with a giant behemoth when they have so many resources, so many people, and so much money? So I went to Thermo Fisher because it's the leading scientific tools and services company, really focused across all applications of science, from life science tools, life sciences and gene therapy to climate science and all the kind of technologies you need to develop there. So I'm very early stage actually in that part of the journey. I only joined less than 6 months ago, 3 of which have been on maternity leave with my second kid. But it's been definitely a huge culture shock, and I've learned a lot. And it's been fascinating actually to see how, at least on the small company side versus the big company side, I think there are people on both sides who sometimes can be very, like, my side is better, I hate this other side of the business, right? But actually they're incredibly synergistic and symbiotic, and they have to work together. And it's just on the life sciences side, it's a beautiful system that we've set up where small companies can really push forward really risky projects, and big companies help to actually commercialize them. Lots of other things I've observed, including just human behavior is incredibly different when you have lots of people in the room versus very few people in the room, but it's been fun so far. And then your question, you said that the major question focused on was the differences in law and regulation and the impact on those settings. Is that fair?
That's fair.
I think the kind of obvious element of it is that small companies just don't have a lot to defend, so they can take a lot more risk on the legal and regulatory side. You see that also come out in ethics, right? Sometimes companies will move beyond the ethical line as well. Just because honestly, if they make that mistake, there's not that much to lose, frankly. And you don't see that behavior from big companies because there is a lot to lose. That's my kind of hypothesis for why I see such different behavior. And that manifests in how big companies, a lot of things have to go through legal and regulatory before they can even move forward. I would argue that kind of leads to regression to the mean sort of behavior. You won't see super risky behavior from a big company, meaning not the high benefits nor the really crappy ideas, right? But oftentimes beforehand, it's hard to tell which one is which. A big company will kind of, because those layers of control sort of squish out the possibility to even explore that. Whereas a small company, probably a lot of lawyers would say small companies don't go to the lawyers soon enough. And so they will go out and take the risk without even knowing that there's a risk, but then they can get results and data that can guide them forward. And many of the time, that's a totally negative result. But then some of the time, it's an amazing result that catalyzes some new discovery or new field. So I'd say you see some of those really, you need both, right? You will never have a world of entirely startups. You'll never move forward if you're all big companies, but they're incredibly helpful in coexisting together and working together.
Thank you, Tina. William Gibson once said, the future is already here, it's just not very evenly distributed. And Professor Petrie, when I think about your work at the intersection of law, patent law, innovation, tech, and economic development, I think that this is like a theme that really underlies a lot of the work you do. And in particular, I'm thinking about the global south and the impact about how all these great things are and how much filters down, and the role of international law, of trade, of kind of constraining and making either good inroads or bad inroads here. And I wonder from that perspective, how you see these biotechnology developments growing and how you see them impacting the global south in particular.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's such an honor to be on this panel. And you've already heard the word patents twice, or at least 3 times, which tells you immediately in the examination and cross-examination between George and Alex that patent law in particular plays a really crucial role, and I think actually from what you were sharing in terms of big firms versus small firms. For most law students, patent law is really technical, mostly taken by students with a STEM background who want to either do patent litigation or end up being a patent examiner in the US Patent Office. And those are really important pathways. I think it's less clear for most people how social patent law is. Its impacts are far beyond what most people understand. And so when you think about these developments in biotech, they're fueled in large part, well, they're financed in large part through the medium of patent law. So you obtain the patent, that becomes an investment that the company holds pretty dearly, that then drives the extent to which investors think, well, is this a good patent? Will the claim survive a challenge? And if it does, then before you even get to the question of whether the product is good, bad, or ethical, a bunch of lawyers have, and with finance folks, have looked at the strength of the patent. They've also looked at, well, where do we get the patent? Do we get it in the US? And if we get it in the US, then typically what follows is an effort to obtain patent protection in Europe and in Japan. All of those decisions affect ultimately both access to the therapeutics, and of course access is very deeply linked to cost. So both George and Alex have, friendly debate about whether you can do this on the cheap, and whether you can do this in a way that most people will have access to. And so I want to say a little bit about the cost point. So even though the COVID vaccines were $30 and easily administered, they were $30 because the government made advanced procurement commitments. The government guaranteed the market. The government also financed in large part a lot of the research, and then accelerated, of course, its deployment because we were in an emergency moment. I think those dynamics, I would say, are very different from the normal structures that condition both what the price of a drug would be and whether it will be available to the rest of the world. So even as of today, many in the Global South still have not gotten their second, much less sometimes first shot of the vaccine. So even at $30, which I think in the Global North seemed easily accessible, that's, if you were to ask a mother of 5, will you take the vaccine or take $30 and feed your family of 5? She won't take the vaccine. She'll feed her family. And so the cost of new therapeutics is, for me, it's both a moral and an ethical issue. But the panel will get to that in terms of what are the constraints about choosing which particular kinds of drugs and what kind of therapeutics we invest in. But once you have patents in the mix, then the pricing also becomes really problematic from the perspective of the Global South, and then that raises the question, do we honor the patents or not? I will say that most calculations about profitability of drugs is not made on whether you can have access to those drugs in the Global South. Those calculations are entirely based on models that look at profitability in the markets of the Global North. Now that raises another question as to whether or not, to what extent do we think of profitability as a proper measure of access to these drugs? And if we don't, what are the alternatives? How else do we finance global drug development and distribution? And these are really difficult questions. Some of you may recall that at one point there was a consideration of allowing Americans to go to Canada to purchase their drugs. And this was extremely controversial, and Big Pharma pushed against it, making the argument that you are siphoning away the capital necessary to produce drugs. So when you think about the ethics of drug development and biotech in particular, where the cost is so high, these are both ethical and moral questions, and they're not going to be easy to disentangle. Is it in fact good policy for the Global North to subsidize the cost of technologies, health technologies in the Global South? And I think in the abstract, it's easy to say, yes, this is a good thing to do. But whenever a politician says, I'm going to raise taxes, we all sort of react negatively to that. And that sort of policy is effectively taxing the Global North for the benefit of the Global South. There's also the question, of course, of how we compare life expectancy. I was just checking the latest numbers, but the question of therapeutics is significant for the quality of life that we all live, and this is true as well in the global south. And so no country, say for example, in the continent of Africa has a life expectancy that's greater than 60. No country. Life expectancy in the global north is roughly in the 70s, right? Low to mid 70s. But that's not that number has been around for a long time, and I think we've sort of gotten immune to it. We just expect even poor people in the US to die earlier. We expect poor people in the world to die earlier. There are all kinds of questions about that, and I think my friends in pharma are always saying, well, we can't bear the burden of those decisions. There's got to be other actors, and it can't just be on the back of pharmaceuticals, and I think that's a fair point. But nonetheless, it does raise this question. When you look at the numbers again, healthy life expectancy, so if your life expectancy is 49, between 49 and 53, which is what it is for many, many countries in the global south, well, how many of those years are healthy years? And the numbers are actually quite startling. There's a significant decline when you're looking at healthy life expectancy. And the diseases for which many people are dying young and large numbers are diseases that could be cured. So there is this challenge. I hear the tension between George and Alex, and it's repeated over time. If you think of the viral and bacterial diseases that are the primary causes of early death, it's the same question about, do we do biotech to address aging, or do we do it to address dengue fever or malaria or tuberculosis? And those are tough questions. They're the same kinds of concerns. I think when you say, let's wait for the patent, well, that's 20 years before a competitor then gets the patent. And how many people die in the interval? How many people experience a lower quality of life in those 20 years while the drug is under patent? So I think that those trade-offs are really important ethical considerations and moral considerations, but they play into the regulatory framework. They play into our, what I think of as an over-dependence on patents as the principal way of generating income and resources, both for development but also for the sustainability of these firms, big and small. And this, I think, is a problem that we are going to have to confront head on. We've been nibbling away and chopping off parts of the elephant. COVID, I think, brought these issues very squarely to our consciousness, I think, as a broader society, and we're going to need to think about that.
Thank you very much. So just to warn you, we're about 7 minutes. We're going to invite questions from the audience. If you're thinking about having a question, please keep that in mind. Then I don't know if you want to ask a question. No, I can. Go ahead.
Yeah, one for George, one for Alex. Advancing the distance of the global north from the global south, we're seeing firms such as Conceivable and Orchid and many other firms that are engaging in selective in vitro fertilization. The egg is assessed for traits, hair color, eye color, muscularity, cognitive capacity. And I'm just inviting George to expand on the proliferation of these. Orchid, for example, has any number of individuals in Silicon Valley, affluent couples that are seeking selective IVF. Extremely promising for those that wish to do cesareans or deliver normal birthing. George, can you address the idea of selective in vitro, the current status and the immediate future of selective IVF?
Yeah, I'd like to mix that in with response to how we get practically down into the poor regions all over the world, not just in the South. IVF, I think, is not the ideal case for that, but we can. But part of it is getting at the in a certain sense, even and some of our technologies have to be tested out on the rich first. The rich volunteered to test out cell phones at a time where there was nobody to talk to on the cell phone, and where it was rumored to melt your brain if you used it too much. So that was, they volunteered to be guinea pigs. But now I would say, not everybody, but a huge fraction of the world's poor benefit in skipping over the landlines and now more cell phones in the world than are people. Like Gibson said, it's not evenly distributed. But it's an example, an even better example is smallpox, where we made a human disease extinct. And therefore, it's one of the few technologies that literally is available to everybody on the planet, no matter how poor, because they don't have to upgrade the drug every year. They don't have to upgrade the vaccine every couple of years. So we should model our thinking about vaccines. So to get back to your question, I'm not forgetting, is I think a better model than IVF. IVF is something that could bring down very serious genetic disease like Tay-Sachs, which not only interferes with the productivity and happiness of the individual affected, but a lot of people around it as well. And if you think of this in poorer families, you have an even bigger impact. And the alternative, I think, is more cost effective. So IVF is probably in the order of $25,000 in our country, maybe a little less in other countries. But an alternative is sequencing, matchmaking, which has been practiced and is in certain communities like the Ashkenazi is more or less eliminated very serious diseases like Tay-Sachs. That has plummeted in cost, and my team has been involved in bringing down that price 20 million fold, and I think it could go down even more. But it's already past the turning point where even the poorer nations could get a return on investment, a savings that would make it reasonable investment to give it away, give it $0 for anybody that wants their genome sequenced, and then they recover that maybe times 10. So these are just some preliminary thoughts to try to address a very good question, which is how do we get this out to everybody? But I don't think IVF is the way to go, although, full disclosure, I am involved in work at Health.
Maybe I'll pop in with one more question before we open up to the audience, which is looking in the room, there's lots of people at the start of their career. If you had to tell them what the thing to look out for, the next big thing, now maybe you're already investing in it, so don't tell them exactly what it is, but in general, the next big thing to think about, the next big thing to learn, that before you leave an institution like this, make sure you've got a handle or made some progress towards. Is there anything that jumps up to any of you that you would love people to walk away from their time at an institution like this thinking about or pursuing or learning about that's relevant to these fields?
Well, I would encourage everybody to get into 4 fields. So I don't think there is anything more important than aging, because first of all, it concerns you. So whatever you do, you have that disease, right? You have that biological process, and you're going to expire. So whatever you do in life, or whatever achievements you have, whatever money you have, you're going to lose everything. And everything you think you own real estate, you rent it for the length of your life, right? Sorry, you actually don't own anything in this life. So it's very, very important to, like from the egoistic perspective, and if you go into law at Harvard, I'm pretty sure you're like very egoistic, right? You don't go to charity, right?
Wow.
So, sorry.
Gauntlet dropped. Okay.
Well, unless you're going like your Mother Teresa and you want to work for free later on. It's a dual purpose area. So first you are going to discover great drugs that will treat neurodegenerative diseases and other diseases of the old age, like we are going after idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. And you are going to help a lot of people, but also you're going to be helping yourself and your parents and everybody. So actually 60 million people die of aging every year. So currently, like, think about those things that you like to talk about on TV. So wars, how many people die there? 300,000, 500,000? Yeah, it's terrible, right? But 60 million people die every year of aging. So if we were to reduce that number and maybe let them die happier and healthier, maybe of other causes, that would be much, much better. Plus, while doing that, you would uncover great technologies that will allow you to do many more things in human development. Many things that we are developing at Insilico, for example, generative chemistry engine that we developed for drugs, now is used for CO2 capture, for material science, for metal-organic frameworks, amides, that capture CO2 more effectively. And by the way, if you get like to, let's say, $5 a ton CO2 capture with recyclability, don't need like forests anymore. And basically, it's more efficient than trees, right? So the ability to decarbonize becomes free if you go into this area. So many technologies are converging. I think that if you want to set a great goal for yourself, aging research is the thing. And by the way, lawyers are going to be they're competing with ChatGPT, and nowadays I go to some of those tools instead of talking to a lawyer first, right? Even when you're like talking about what can I disclose after my phase 2 clinical trial is complete, right? So tells you exactly what you need to know. And finally, I just experienced, I don't have children, so I don't know how it feels. But when your phase 2 clinical trial reads out and you see efficacy and you see that your drug that you started working on really helps human patients, and especially if it leads to an improvement in function, this is the most, I cried, seriously, I cried for an hour after we read out, because it's better than anything. So that feeling, I just want to do it again and again and again. It costs a lot to get to that point in a few years, but that's the most satisfying, gratifying feeling you can ever get. So try to get into this area and try to go into hardcore drug discovery. Other area, of course, hibernation. So that technology is definitely going to evolve and develop. And imagine that you can walk into the chamber, in January and wake up in December, get updated on your favorite Netflix shows, see who got elected, and think about what to do the next year. So you can actually see more life. Great entertaining experience. I don't think that there is any physical limit to going for hibernation technologies. So I think that's a very promising direction. So when you hear this kind of science fiction stuff, you should pay attention.
Great. Got any quick answers to anything else you want students to learn before they leave the institution? And we'll start getting people in with questions.
I would, I'm not a big fan of hibernation. I think it's hard enough to keep up with technology if you're awake. But certainly we agree on. I don't think of it as aging. I think of it as common diseases, and common diseases affect the poor, and some of them affect them fairly young. But it is still age related, and it doesn't affect babies. So anyway, so I think that's something to keep your eye on. But also keep your eye on things where we could solve this rich-poor, things that do spread in a certain sense. So vaccines, in a certain sense, spread or stop spread in a way that can be global in impact. And so think about how you can, the laws that enable us to do these things on a global scale. For a very edgy example is gene drives. You mentioned malaria. There is on the table very realistic plan for eliminating either the vectors that carry the malaria parasite or their ability to carry them without affecting the mosquitoes themselves. I think most people would vote for getting rid of mosquitoes, but nevertheless, it will be decided on safety and efficacy in the end. But that's something that has amazing moral and legal things on both sides. I think the side of getting rid of malaria will win, but and I think even the the discussions about GMOs is easing up in a very big way, because now we're talking about cisgenics rather than transgenics. So these are much perceived as safer, although there's no evidence that transgenics were ever unsafe, but it's perceived. It's also perceived that we're no longer talking about one giant monopoly named Monsanto. We're now talking about a bunch of, smaller startups that are European, some of them. And so Europeans can take a little ownership. And that's especially true when it comes to things that the previous critics of GMOs, like the Europeans, sorry to pick on the Europeans, climate change and these global diseases that are keeping people poor. It's a vicious cycle of these diseases, either inherited diseases or infectious diseases, that take so many family resources just to keep a few kids alive, that if you could break that cycle, then suddenly they'd have a few more pennies to invest in education and food, better nutrition and so forth, and the next cycle around it goes better and better. So I think I would encourage you all to think in those kind of terms. How can we deal with revolutionary things that are going to have some resistance, like gene drives?
Can I say a couple of things? Since we have so many law students here, I think it's really important. We teach legal ethics, mainly because there's a bar exam component that requires students to take it. And I teach it very differently, but I think that we are increasingly at the law school, and Professor Cohen is really at the forefront of this, and a lot of what Petrie-Flom does. But we really have a lot of work to do to think about the ethical dimensions of all of these scientific breakthroughs. I like to think of the biblical story of the Tower of Babel and all of the confusion that comes. And there's real ethical conundrums, not only in the trade-offs that we make in terms of the drugs that we pursue and aging versus hibernate. Is it ethical to hibernate? Is that the kind of world we want to be in, and how we make these decisions? And I think lawyers, and obviously philosophers, but lawyers who will translate philosophical intuition into norms and legal frameworks and regulatory frameworks, the capacity to think about this and to think about new frameworks of analysis will be seriously important. And it's going to be really important, as George says, these experiments happen first in rich countries, and those rich countries often then set the global norms. So that is a huge, I think, issue. I think the second thing that I would say, we don't spend as much time thinking about this here at Harvard, but agricultural innovation and sort of the way in which what we eat and the diseases that we endure, that intersection is an area that I think we do not see the sort of advances in legal and regulatory discussions that we really ought to. And then I have to say something about the death of Chevron. Now that we are in a post-Chevron world and we don't know what the FDA's power or authority or reliability or deference to FDA decisions will be, who makes these decisions, and what's the reliability and the integrity of these decisions, and how do we think about those? So it's a brave new world for lawyers, and with due respect to my panelists here on the side, Alex, ChatGPT is not human, and it will not make the decisions of the spirit and of the soul that are very often at play as we think about the ethics of biotech and the brave new world that we are hurtling towards.
Great, well, I'm gonna ask permission from Susanna to go 5 minutes into the pub, so we'll be 5 minutes late to the pub to get some student questions. About 10 minutes for questions. Can we get some questions from the audience? If you want to speak, you can come queue up and ask a question. Please.
I'm just testing.
Yeah.
So, hello, thank you so much. My name is Alvin Brennbecken. I'm a PhD candidate and medical doctor from Norway. I'm visiting from Bergen Center of Ethics and Priority Setting, and I'm focusing on priority setting in healthcare. And the thing that I'm wondering about, I want to return to the buyer side and the implementation of these high-cost therapies. because there is something about the affordability. So there's a big movement within on the buyer side for in European countries for negotiating prices. I know this is different in the US, but I want to hear some reflections on price negotiations for affordability, managed entry agreements for risk sharing. I know you have very different roles, so it would be highly interesting to hear how we can work to provide treatment for more patients through such mechanisms. Thank you so much.
Maybe I'll start by just saying you get what you pay for and you pay for what you get, right? In the sense of when you want to incent people and figure this out. If you look at the Moderna vaccine, just the COVID-19 vaccine, well, how did we achieve so much so quickly? It's in part by advanced purchase agreements and the like. And there's a way of creativity of thinking about the typical tools like patent and IP, how much is interchangeable with reimbursement and other kinds of theories about how we pay people. But I'm curious what the others think.
I think to some extent the advance, the guarantee was very helpful in that case. But the reason that they could guarantee it is because they knew there was going to be a big market. And the thing that brought the price down was the big market. And maybe the government accelerated it tremendously. But what we need to do is think about ways that we can find big markets that will drive the price down. However, the machinations of the market are seen. It doesn't always happen through government handouts.
So just to add to that, currently the time to develop a therapy for, let's say, a novel mechanism is going to be about 15 years, if it's a novel biological mechanism. And it's going to consume a lot of resources, so at least maybe $500 million if you're super efficient. So in order for you to recover those 15 years and $500 million, you need to be able to charge a lot for the therapy. Let's say you have 5 years of patent life left out of the 20 years when you file. So it's actually not enough to be able to recover the cost, right? And that's actually one of the reasons why some of the programs got abandoned, because you cannot really innovate at scale. If you don't have efficient reimbursement, and I'm neutral geopolitically, right? Please don't misunderstand, but let's look at China. Name one drug that was genuinely discovered in China. They invested $1.5 trillion into local infrastructure to service the pharmaceutical industry. So they touched every molecule that has basically got approved in the recent past. But in terms of genuine innovation, very difficult, right? Why? Because the local authorities do not really pay a lot for innovative therapeutics, right? So nobody wants to invest, right? So actually, if US wouldn't be doing what they are doing with the healthcare system, we would not have innovative drugs. So thank you, United States, right? So thank you. And if you try to push for affordability, like for example, Inflation Reduction Act, phenomenal initiative, by the way. And I'm in pharma. When somebody in pharma says that, that's like really scary. People will be like, what are you talking about, right? Inflation Reduction Act takes your power away, right? So it takes your profits away. But what it is intended to do is intended to make you more efficient, right? So cost down your drug discovery, right? And now you can, and make it faster. And now you can enjoy a little bit longer time on the patent, right? So what the Inflation Reduction does, it basically cannot extend the life of the patents for small molecules that have been on the market longer than 20 years, right? People were reformulating, doing something, a small change, and get additional, 10, 20 years. Now it's very difficult, so it's a good thing. But what pharma started doing, they went into biologics, where they've got longer patent protection, more process mechanisms, right? So it's cheating. Instead of becoming more efficient. And what we need to figure out is how to make pharmaceutical industry more efficient. That's why you need companies like mine. Maybe you should start one. So everybody here should start one, become more efficient. And my average time to preclinical candidate, 13 months. Average time to first in human, 22 months. Average time to phase 2, around 3.5 years now. And costs are like 1/10, 1/20th of what Big Pharma has, right? So if you have more companies like that, they will disrupt the market and make sure that it's affordable. It will take time, but without you going into this field and making progress, we won't be able to do that. And it requires like lifetime commitment. You go and commit to this company, 15 years, 20 years, you have to be with it before you get an approval. That's my recommendation. Yeah, it's very easy to say, oh, let's cost down the prices, right? Great. Then you're not going to have innovative drugs for yourself. When you're old, everybody here is a patient just 30 years from now. Some will be dead.
Okay.
With that cheery thought, can we sneak in another question? Does anybody else have a question they want to ask? Just come right to the mic. Oh, why don't we get both of your questions? You come up too. We'll get both questions and one answer. No, we'll get the two of your questions and we'll get one. Oh, three of you. Okay, so 3 quick questions and then 1 round of answers.
Hello, I'm Hannah, and I'm a master's of bioethics at Harvard Medical School. So my question is that, like, when we're talking about making new technologies more accessible to everybody, it always sounds like a good thing, right? We're just like, wow, what a human, like, what a good human, or something like that. But actually making all new technologies more accessible, for example, to Global South or to, like, poor nations, it will cause us, like, having less funds for future projects. So is it always good to make new technologies more accessible to everybody? Because that way we're not going to make science progress, right? Like, what do you think of it? Because when the COVID hit, I was in the Global South, I was in Iran. And like I completely understand the people who are debating for making technologies more accessible because you can save lives and save education and save humanity by that. But at the same time, you are neglecting the importance of the funds that you need for future, right? So what do you think of it? And thanks so much for today.
Hold your answers out. Get the 2 questions in, and then we'll have 1 set of answers for everybody.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Michael. I'm also in the bioethics program at HMS, so nice to meet you. So my question, I hope it's not very naive, but I genuinely am curious. But we always talk about biotech applications to like food, as you were talking in GMOs, and then with drugs, which I think is the status quo. But I'm always curious about just the application of biotech into cosmetics, because it's not really an area that's talked about. Like for instance, at HBS, there's this wonderful course called Entrepreneurship in Life Sciences, which is also about like startups and drug companies. And there's like 1 sentence in the syllabus. It's like, oh, you can apply biotech to cosmetics, but we don't really cover that in this course. And that's something that I see like very much. And I suppose, in my opinion, cosmetics is such a oversaturated industry, but it works because of that hypersaturation. And I feel like cosmetics in general are much more accessible to general population. Like I think people are accessing different kinds of cosmetics. Even sunscreen, you can argue whether or not like that's like something medical or is it more of a cosmetics side of things. So I guess my question is like, from my understanding, cosmetics are not as regulated as drugs are, but they go through like a very similar process. But there are advantages to not having that hyper-regulation on that industry, but you can still accomplish very similar things. And there's also just an international approach when it comes to cosmetics as well, because there's booming markets all over the world, and because of those lesser regulations, I'm not saying that we should ignore safety, but because of those lesser regulations, I feel like there is innovation to be made in that area as well, but it doesn't seem to be focused, and I'm just curious as to like why, like for example, when you look at Korea, they're already in.
Let's sneak in the last question. We'll hold so we'll get an answer to that question. Let's get the last question.
Sorry.
It's okay. No, you're doing great.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. My name is Arka. I'm also a master's in bioethics, but I worked in genetic engineering at a biotech for a couple of years, and I'm pre-law. So I kind of saw biotech from a lot of different angles, whether that's bench research, science, and also like regulatory policies. And my question kind of goes hand in hand with Hannah's a little bit of, in making these biotech innovation accessible to the Global South and people who need it, like how do you go about actually implementing that, making that happen? Where is kind of the intersection between that and like insurance policies and laws? And and I think Professor Church mentioned this, how do you break the cycle for people who don't have access to this? Because oftentimes, like even if you can physically get it, geographically to the area that you need it, a lot of different countries have different policies when it comes to healthcare and insurance and things like that. And unfortunately, people who are in higher socioeconomic positions tend to have better things like insurance policies, things that give them better access to these innovations, whereas the others do not. So like, how do you actually go about implementing, like bringing this innovation to people, like to their bedsides, to their pill boxes? How does that even happen? How do you get from there to there,
Great, so we're gonna get your best 2 minutes on 3 topics, right? The downside of accessibility, the how-to of accessibility, the last mile problem, and the application of what you're talking about to cosmetics. Anybody want to jump in on any of those? Please go ahead.
Oh my god.
I have too much airtime, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it. The cosmetics one I think is probably the most direct one, which is I think the market's just much smaller, right? Cosmetics are just much cheaper in general to be competitive. In biotechnology, $30 is a lot for a cosmetic versus really cheap for a drug. So I think that's the difference. You see that a lot in climate technology in terms of why that's also a challenge to commercialize new innovations. You're competing against really cheap food, really cheap energy. That's what makes it hard to move forward on these innovative sides. On the affordability thing, completely agree. I mean, that's why there's such a huge area of just trying to figure this out, right? I think the way that things have shaken out is it's time. The cost is time. So if you can create a viable market within the global north, and we've touched on this, if you can create a viable market to get the drug developed, and you're willing to wait long enough for it to be to get to the global south, then it can reach there affordably. But it's probably really hard to say we're going to price everything affordably immediately and still incentivize that sort of innovation. So I think it's just, you have to be kind of realistic with how a system can be set up that's sustainable.
Last thought, go ahead.
So this is worthy of a class, frankly, or several classes, and I
Including
think
the ones you teach, by the way.
I wanted to say two things. First, I think part of the challenge is figuring out how we direct innovation, the ex-ante problem of the choices the scientists make. Currently, our IP system does not tell you to do research in aging or in hibernation or IVF for that matter. And so those choices are completely, it's an open market. There is a question as to whether or not we should in fact do more so that the trade-offs between the diseases that we know today and the future diseases can be clear. But that's something we don't regulate. We also do not sufficiently ask pharmaceuticals to be transparent about their pricing. So I had the privilege of being on the Secretary General of the UN had a high-level panel on access to medicines and patents, and every country, including, in fact, in Norway, in the Scandinavian countries, which we look to sort of as better models than that in the US, every country is struggling with the cost of funding purchases of medications, especially for the elderly population. Some countries in their sovereign funds, pension funds, are seeing dramatic rises in what they're having to take out, which is why, by the way, we had a deal with the Department of Veterans Administration here when at some point the US began to threaten compulsory licensing. There are other tools in the toolkit, but the decisions about a market for health and living and the choices about how to regulate those markets are at the intersection of law and ethics and public policy, and untangling those will require both political decisions but also legal frameworks that compensate for the time investment and the cost investment, but that find us other ways of financing drug development.
Please join me in thanking this panel. And now we eat and drink, but that's downstairs in the pub. You're welcome to come and join us and to meet lots of people in this community. So please, we hope you do.